Ancient empires were built on secrets locked inside metal. This video uncovers 25 forgotten metallurgy methods that powered an industrial world long before our own. By the end, you will understand how lost arts of fire and chemistry shaped the rise and fall of civilizations. How did a sword forged in India become legend for its unbreakable sharpness? Why does a 1600-year-old iron pillar in Delhi stand completely rust-free? What does it truly take to rediscover the genius of our ancestors? That quest for superior metal began not in a sterile laboratory, but in the fiery heart of a simple clay furnace. To grasp the genius of these forgotten methods, you must first step into the sandals of an ancient metalworker. Their world was one of intense heat, unpredictable flames, and raw materials dug directly from the earth. This was not a science of precise formulas, but a sacred craft passed down through generations, often in whispers. The secrets of turning rock into gleaming, durable metal were so valuable that they were protected by priestly castes and powerful guilds. A city's wealth, a king's military might, even the reach of an empire, could hinge on the quality of the bronze for its soldiers' swords or the iron for its farmers' plows. The drive for better, stronger materials fueled exploration into unknown lands, sparked wars over mines rich with ore, and quietly built the technological bedrock of our modern world. With this understanding of the high stakes involved, we can truly appreciate the first and perhaps most foundational of these lost arts. That delicate wax bee, a fleeting sculpture destined for transformation, represents one of history's most elegant solutions to a stubborn problem. How do you capture the fluid grace of nature or the subtle curve of a deity's smile in unyielding metal? The answer was lost wax casting, a method so sophisticated it feels almost modern. An artisan would begin with a model meticulously shaped in beeswax. This model was then encased in a special clay shell, a recipe often unique to each workshop. This was the first critical secret, the clay mix. It had to be porous enough to let gases escape when fired, yet strong enough to withstand the incredible thermal shock of molten bronze. The entire assembly was then heated in a kiln. The wax would melt and drain out through pre-carved channels, leaving behind a perfect, hollow negative space within the now hardened clay. This is where the magic happened. Molten bronze, glowing with the heat of a small sun, was poured into that empty cavity, filling every minute crevice the wax had once occupied. Once the metal cooled and solidified, the clay mold was broken away, revealing a perfect metal replica of the original wax model. The wax was sacrificed, lost forever to create something permanent. This process allowed for a level of detail that direct carving of stone or wood could never achieve. Think of the fine lines on a piece of jewelry, the intricate feathers on a cast eagle, or the dynamic folds of a robe on a statue. These were all possible because the original was shaped in a soft, forgiving material like wax. But the true genius, the part often lost to time, was in the burnout cycle. The temperature and duration of the firing had to be perfect. Too little heat and residual wax would contaminate the mold, causing flaws in the final casting. Too much heat or heating too quickly, and the clay shell would crack or even explode, destroying the work in an instant. This nuanced understanding of materials and fire was the artisan's guarded treasure, a knowledge that died with them, leaving behind only the breathtaking bronze objects as silent testimony to their skill. To create such masterpieces, however, they first needed a consistent supply of the most vital ingredient, the bronze itself. That glowing bronze was born from a far more primal and punishing process, deep within a charcoal furnace. To unlock metal from ordinary rock, ancient smelters had to create a miniature star on Earth, a feat achieved not with magic, but with meticulously engineered air. The heart of this operation was the bellows, a technology far more sophisticated than it appears. These were not simple leather bags. They were often complex systems of multiple chambers, crafted from the hides of goats or oxen, designed to deliver a continuous, powerful blast of air into the heart of the fire. This was the critical difference between a warm campfire and a metal-winning inferno. The forced air did more than just make the charcoal burn hotter. It created a specific chemical condition inside the furnace known as a reducing atmosphere. Imagine the ore, a greenish stone like malachite or a reddish rock like hematite. These are essentially metals trapped in a partnership with oxygen. The superheated carbon monoxide gas produced by the blast of air on the burning charcoal acts like a chemical thief, aggressively stealing the oxygen atoms away. What remains is a heavy, molten blob of pure copper or iron, which trickles down to collect at the furnace's base. The true secret, however, lay in the precise delivery of that air. The smelters used clay nozzles called tires, carefully positioned to direct the airflow exactly where it was needed. The rhythm of pumping the bellows was a sacred ritual. Too slow and the temperature would drop, leaving a useless half-baked slag. Too fast or too forceful, and you could cool the core of the reaction or even blow the precious concentrated metal dust right out of the furnace. This nuanced skill, the feel for the fire's breath, was the smelter's most protected knowledge. It was the difference between a rich yield of metal and a day of back-breaking labor for nothing. This raw, lumpy bloom of metal was the starting point, but it was far from a finished sword or a tool. The true artistry was only just beginning. From that raw bloom of iron, another legendary metal was born, one that would become the stuff of myth across continents. In the sealed crucibles of ancient India and Sri Lanka, metal workers performed a kind of alchemy, transforming ordinary iron into a material of extraordinary strength and beauty. This was the birth of Wootz steel. The process was deceptively simple in its ingredients, but profound in its execution. Artisans would take pieces of relatively pure iron and pack them tightly into a clay pot along with carbon-rich organic materials, often selected leaves or specific woods. The container was then sealed shut and placed in a charcoal furnace where it would be heated for days on end, not to a melting point, but to a precise, glowing orange heat that was meticulously maintained. This long, slow cooking was the heart of the cementation process. Inside that sealed environment, something remarkable occurred. Carbon atoms from the organic matter would gradually, over many hours, migrate into the solid iron. They did not melt together. Instead, the carbon slowly seeped into the iron's crystalline lattice, like moisture soaking into a sponge. This diffusion created an ultra-high carbon steel, a material far harder and more capable of holding a razor edge than any ordinary iron. But the true magic, the step that was most closely guarded, came next. After the days of heating, the crucible had to be cooled. This was not a matter of simply removing it from the fire. The cooling cycle, a process we now call annealing, was the final and most critical secret. The rate of cooling and the specific temperatures at which the steel was held during its descent directly controlled the formation of its internal crystalline structure. If cooled correctly, the steel would develop a unique microstructure of iron carbide bands within a softer steel matrix. It was this hidden architecture that, when the steel was forged and polished, revealed the famous watery pattern, a swirling, rippling surface that looked like flowing silk or a damask textile, hence the name Damascus steel. The loss of this precise thermal recipe is a profound mystery. It was a knowledge held not in books, but in the hands and eyes of the masters, a feel for the fire that died with them. Modern metallurgists can analyze the composition of ancient Wootz, but replicating the exact sequence of heating and cooling that unlocks its legendary properties remains one of the great challenges in the field. This relentless pursuit of the perfect weapon, however, was matched by an equally intense drive to protect against it. That dramatic hiss was the sound of steel being reborn. When a glowing blade met its quenching bath, it underwent a violent transformation, locking in incredible hardness at the risk of its own destruction. The choice of liquid was the smith's first secret. Water, the most common, cooled the metal with shocking speed, creating a blade of extreme hardness. But this speed came with a cost, immense internal stresses that could leave the steel as brittle as glass. A sudden impact and a sword could shatter into pieces. Brine, salt dissolved in water, cooled even faster and more uniformly, preventing soft spots. Some legends speak of the use of urine, particularly from animals, as the organic salts within it could alter the quenching process in subtle ways, though this remains debated. Oils, like those from whales or olives, offered a gentler touch. They cooled the steel more slowly, resulting in a slightly less hard but far tougher blade, one that could bend without breaking. This was not a simple choice. It was a calculated decision based on the intended use of the weapon, but quenching alone created a blade that was dangerously tense. The true artistry, the step that separated a master smith from an apprentice, was tempering. After quenching, the blade was carefully reheated, but not to a glowing heat. It was warmed just enough to relieve those deadly internal stresses. Masters judged this critical temperature not with instruments, but with their eyes, watching the thin oxide layer that formed on the polished steel. As the metal warmed, it would bloom with a spectrum of colors. A pale straw yellow indicated a perfect temper for a razor's edge, while a deep blue meant the steel had been softened too much, becoming flexible but losing its sharpness. This color palette was their thermometer, holding the blade at that precise straw color for the exact right amount of time was a high-stakes alchemy of heat and perception. A few seconds too long or a few degrees too hot, and days of laborious forging were wasted. This intimate dance with fire and light required a controlled environment, a hint that ancient furnaces were far more sophisticated than simple fire pits. While European smiths were still struggling with inefficient furnaces, a revolution in heat was taking shape in East Africa. The Haya people, in what is now Tanzania, engineered a furnace so brilliant it defied conventional history. Their design was not just an improvement, it was a fundamental leap in thermal efficiency. They built tall, conical structures from a special, heat-resistant clay, stacking them to exploit a simple but profound principle of physics. The real innovation was hidden in the airflow. These furnaces were designed so that the scorching hot exhaust gases, which would normally just escape and waste their energy, were channeled downward. This hot air would pass over and through a lattice of clay pipes, transferring its intense heat to them. Then, when fresh air was drawn into the furnace from the bottom, it had to travel through these pre-heated pipes. The air entering the combustion chamber was no longer cool, it was already hundreds of degrees hot. This preheated air created a ferociously efficient burn, allowing the Haya to achieve temperatures well over 1,800 degrees Celsius. That was hot enough to produce high-carbon steel directly from the ore in a single, continuous process. Europeans would not develop a similar method, the blast furnace, for over 1,500 years. The secret was not just the shape, but the very substance of the furnace itself. The clay mix was a carefully guarded recipe, likely including materials like termite mound soil, known for its refractory properties, which could withstand these repeated thermal cycles without cracking. The internal geometry, the precise arrangement of the pipes and the chamber, was a masterpiece of communal knowledge refined over generations. This was not a technology born in a king's workshop, but from the collective intelligence of a community. Its eventual fading from use is a quiet tragedy, likely tied to shifts in trade routes and the social structures that supported this specialized craft. It makes you wonder, if an innovation this advanced could be lost in one part of the world, what other methods of mass production have vanished from history without a trace? That shimmering gold layer on a Roman emperor's statue was often a deadly illusion. The sixth forgotten method, Mercury gilding, reveals a world where artisans routinely risked their lives for the sake of spectacle. Both the Romans and the Chinese perfected this dangerous alchemy, a process known as amalgamation. It began by taking liquid mercury, quicksilver, and dissolving solid gold within it. The gold would seemingly vanish, forming a thick, silvery paste called an amalgam. This paste could then be painted or rubbed onto objects made of bronze, copper, or even silver. The application was the easy part. The true peril came with the final step. The coated object was placed over a heat source, often a charcoal brazier. As it warmed, the mercury would begin to vaporize, turning into an invisible, odorless, and lethally toxic fume. The gold, now freed from its liquid prison, would bond firmly to the surface, leaving behind a flawless, permanent, and brilliant gold finish. This was not a process for the faint of heart. These gilding workshops were almost certainly located in well-ventilated areas, or perhaps even outdoors, a necessary precaution against the poisonous clouds. The workers would have known the risks, suffering from tremors, memory loss, and madness, conditions we now recognize as mercury poisoning. This willingness to use such a volatile substance speaks volumes about the drive for opulence and the profound, if perilous, understanding of chemistry they possessed. They knew that heat would drive off the mercury, a clear application of the principle that different substances change states at different temperatures. The result was a breathtaking deception, allowing emperors and nobles to present objects of solid gold to the world without the immense cost. Entire temple roofs could be made to gleam as if made from the sun itself, and armor could dazzle on the parade ground, all through this thin, deceptive, and dangerously applied veneer. It was a testament to an industrial courage, or perhaps desperation, that we can scarcely comprehend today. But manipulating precious metals was only one facet of their chemical genius. The same deadly element that gilded Roman statues also reveals a far more delicate artistry. While mercury offered a dramatic and dangerous path to grandeur, another ancient method achieved its breathtaking effects through patience and microscopic precision. This is the seventh forgotten method, the art of granulation, perfected by Etruscan and Greek goldsmiths. Imagine a piece of jewelry, a pendant or an earring, where the surface is not smooth, but appears to be covered in a fine, shimmering dust. Look closer, and you see that this dust is actually composed of thousands of perfectly spherical, microscopic gold beads, each one smaller than a grain of sand. Creating these tiny granules was a feat in itself, but the true, enduring mystery lies in how they were attached. There are no visible seams, no lumps of solder, no signs of heat damage. It appears as if the granules simply grew there, fused to the background by magic. The secret was almost certainly a form of invisible solder, a colloidal paste made from copper salts mixed with an organic glue, perhaps from fish or plants. The artisan would paint this watery paste onto the gold base, carefully position each granule using a fine brush, and then heat the entire piece in a furnace. The magic happened in that fire. The heat would burn away the organic glue, but the copper salts would remain. In the specific, oxygen-free environment of the furnace, a reducing atmosphere, those copper particles would diffuse into the gold at the points of contact. This created a microscopic weld, a bond at the atomic level, without any molten metal ever flooding the delicate work and obscuring the tiny spheres. The precise formula for the paste and the exact furnace conditions needed were the goldsmith's most treasured secrets. Too much copper and a visible stain would tarnish the pure gold. The wrong temperature and the granules would either not stick at all or melt into useless blobs. This was a high-wire act of chemistry and thermal control, resulting in objects of such sublime beauty that modern jewelers, even with all our advanced tools, struggle to replicate them perfectly. This obsession with decorating precious metals speaks to a world of immense skill, but it also highlights a critical divide. How did ancient industries produce the sheer volume of common materials needed for everyday life, for the nails in a ship or the tools on a farm? The relentless hammer falls were the heartbeat of the Iron Age. While the Haya achieved steel in a single step, most of the ancient world relied on a more visceral and physically punishing method, the Bloomery process. This was the forge where raw ore was transformed into the versatile material known as wrought iron. Inside a simple clay furnace, a mixture of iron ore and charcoal burned for hours. The goal was not to melt the iron completely, but to heat it to a critical temperature where the oxygen could be stolen away by carbon monoxide, leaving behind a mass of semi-solid, glowing iron. What emerged was not a clean bar of metal, but a spongy, chaotic lump riddled with stone and glassy impurities, a mass called the bloom. This raw bloom was just the beginning of the true labor. The next step, known as shingling, separated the master from the apprentice. The blacksmith would repeatedly heat the heavy bloom to a welding heat and then place it on a massive anvil. With powerful, rhythmic blows from a sledgehammer, he would beat the glowing mass, folding it and compressing it. With each thunderous strike, liquid slag, the waste material, would be squeezed out like juice from a fruit, spraying in incandescent droplets. The skill was not just in brute force, but in the precise angle of each hammer blow and the timing of the folds. This mechanical working was what aligned the iron's internal grain structure, weaving the fibers together into a strong, fibrous material. The resulting wrought iron was tough, malleable, and resistant to cracking, perfect for forging into nails, hinges, tools, and the tire rims for chariots and wagons. It was the skeleton of the ancient world, but consider the sheer physical effort required for a single usable bar of iron. A large bloom might weigh over 20 pounds, and hammering it into a consolidated state was a day's work for a strong individual. This intense labor intensity raises a profound question. How did ancient empires, which required thousands of tons of iron for their armies and infrastructure, possibly manage such a monumental task? The answer lies not in a single mighty hammer, but in the synchronized work of countless hands. The ring of a perfectly tuned bell was the sound of success for an ancient metal caster. This ninth forgotten method, organ pipe metallurgy, suggests that artisans used their ears as precision instruments to judge the quality of their work. When a massive bronze bell was cast, the cooling process was its most vulnerable moment. As the metal solidified from the outside in, internal stresses could build up, leading to invisible cracks or uneven densities that would compromise the bell's tone and structural integrity. Some historians propose that master craftsmen, particularly in ancient China, would listen intently as the bell cooled. They were not just waiting for silence, they were waiting for a specific, pure harmonic resonance to emerge from the heated metal. A clear, sustained ring indicated that the bronze had cooled uniformly, its crystalline structure forming in a consistent, seamless lattice. A dull thud, a warble, or a cracked note, however, signaled a fatal flaw hidden within the casting. This was quality control at the most organic level, a direct feedback loop between the artisan's senses and the material's hidden properties. It represents a holistic approach to industry, where the lines between art, science, and craft blurred completely. The sound of the metal was not a byproduct, it was a diagnostic tool. This deep, sensory understanding allowed them to produce sets of bells, like the legendary ones from the tomb of Marquis of Zeng, that could play a complete chromatic scale over 5 octaves, with each bell capable of producing 2 distinct, pure notes depending on where it was struck. Achieving such acoustic perfection in cast bronze is a staggering feat even with modern technology. It forces us to reconsider the very definition of precision, which we so often associate with digital readouts and laser measurements. For these masters, precision was a sound you could hear, a vibration you could feel in your bones. This fusion of music and metallurgy points to a world where the creation of an object was inseparable from its ultimate function, a philosophy that would extend to other breathtakingly complex casting projects. The silence of a cooling bronze bell gave way to a different kind of orchestration, one of clay and geometry. In the foundries of the Shang and Zhou dynasties, artisans achieved the impossible, casting bronze ritual vessels adorned with intricate, swirling dragons and complex geometric patterns that seemed to defy the very nature of metalworking. Their secret was a radical departure from the lost wax method used elsewhere. They built their masterpieces not from a single mold, but from a puzzle of many. This was piece mold casting, a system of breathtaking ingenuity. A master model of the desired vessel was first sculpted from clay. Once hardened, this model was used to create a series of separate, negative mold sections. These sections were not arbitrary. They were carefully engineered blocks, each one forming a part of the final vessel, a leg, a side panel, a section of the handle. The edges of these clay blocks were precision-keyed, meaning they had interlocking tabs and slots so they could be reassembled perfectly around a clay core, leaving a narrow, uniform gap between the core and the outer mold. This gap was where the molten bronze would flow. The true genius of this method was how it handled decoration. All the intricate designs, the touty masks and the spiraling thunder patterns, were carved in reverse directly into the inner surfaces of these clay mold pieces. When the bronze was poured, the metal filled these recessed carvings, resulting in the sharp, raised designs that are the hallmark of these ancient treasures. There was no chasing or engraving after the fact. The decoration was born with the vessel itself. The success of the entire operation, however, hinged on 2 deeply guarded secrets. The first was the clay recipe for the molds themselves. This was not ordinary mud. It was a sophisticated refractory mix, likely containing sand, crushed pottery grog, and organic materials, formulated to withstand the violent thermal shock of 1600-degree bronze without cracking, warping, or fusing to the metal. The second secret was the mastery of alloys. These were not simple coppers. The bronze was a precise blend of copper, tin, and sometimes lead. The tin provided hardness and a lower melting point, while the lead improved the fluidity of the molten metal, allowing it to fill every minute detail of those complex mold assemblies. This modular approach was a form of mass production, but for objects of the highest ritual significance, different workshops could specialize in creating specific, standardized mold sections, which could then be assembled for various commissions. It was a sophisticated precursor to assembly line thinking, applied over 3,000 years ago. The complexity of a single vessel, with its perfectly fitted mold pieces and its precisely formulated metal, speaks of a systematic, industrial knowledge that was far ahead of its time. It makes you wonder what other manufacturing principles we consider modern were, in fact, ancient innovations waiting to be rediscovered. That brilliant shine we associate with priceless bronze statues is a modern preference, a misunderstanding of the ancient world's intentions. For the Greeks and Romans, a gleaming metal surface was merely the raw canvas. The true artistry often came after the casting was complete, in the deliberate and controlled application of color. They were masters of patination, chemically inducing specific hues to protect the metal and convey meaning. A vibrant green, known as verdigris, or a deep, lustrous black were not signs of neglect, but of sophisticated finishing. Artisans would create pastes from common household substances like vinegar, salt, and even fermented urine, carefully painting these mixtures onto the bronze surface. The object would then be buried in a dung heap or placed in a sealed, humid chamber. This was not a random act, it was a carefully controlled chemical reaction. The acids and salts in the paste would accelerate the natural corrosion process, forcing the copper in the bronze to react with oxygen, carbon dioxide, and chlorides in the air. The result was a stable, adherent layer of copper carbonates or chlorides, a synthetic skin that actually shielded the metal beneath from further, more destructive corrosion. The profound secret, the knowledge that was so easily lost, was in the specific recipe. A perfectly balanced mixture would produce a beautiful, stable patina that could last for centuries. But a slightly wrong ratio, an impurity in the salt, or an incorrect application time could create an aggressive, unstable version of bronze disease. This flawed patina would not protect the metal, it would instead slowly, invisibly consume it from the inside out, turning a masterpiece into a brittle, pitted shell over time. This ability to manipulate surface chemistry reveals an advanced, practical understanding of corrosion that feels eerily modern. It makes you wonder, if they could so skillfully control the decay of their own creations, what other secrets of preservation have been entirely forgotten by history? Deep within the mountain, the air itself was a weapon. To shatter the unyielding stone that hid precious metal ores, ancient miners turned to a brutal but brilliant technique, fire setting. Without explosives, their only recourse was to harness the violent power of thermal shock. They would build a roaring fire directly against the solid rock face, stoking it for hours until the stone glowed with intense heat. Then, in a dramatic and dangerous moment, they would douse the superheated rock with a sudden deluge of water, or, even more effectively, vinegar. The rapid, extreme contraction was too much for the rock to bear. It would crack and splinter, spalling off in fragments that could then be pried loose with hammers and chisels. This was not a quick process. It was agonizingly slow, filling the cramped tunnels with suffocating smoke and intense heat. The choice of coolant was a matter of deep practical knowledge. While water worked, vinegar was often preferred. Its mild acidic properties were believed to help etch and weaken the mineral bonds in the rock, making it fracture more readily. Think of the immense human cost behind every lump of copper ore or tin stone. A team of miners might spend an entire day just to advance a few feet deeper into the mountain, all while breathing toxic fumes and risking cave-ins. This single, laborious method powered the entire supply chain of the ancient metal world. The raw, fractured rock they won through such grueling effort was merely the first step. Each piece then had to be transformed by hand into a manageable powder before the real magic of the furnace could even begin. The brutal work of fire setting produced not clean metal, but piles of fractured rock. Before any furnace could roar to life, this rocky mixture had to be tamed. The 13th forgotten method, ore dressing with animal fat and flotation, reveals a profound chemical intuition at the very start of the metal-making chain. Ancient miners faced a fundamental problem. the rock they broke free was mostly worthless gangue, with only tiny, scattered particles of valuable copper or lead sulfide hidden within. Separating the precious from the mundane by hand was an impossible, endless task. Their solution was as clever as it was simple. They would crush the ore into a fine powder using stone hammers and grinding stones, then mix this powder into a large trough or a flowing stream of water. Here is where the secret ingredient came in. They would add animal fat, perhaps from a butchered goat, or pungent vegetable oils. As they agitated this murky soup, a fascinating separation would occur. The valuable metal sulfide particles, being naturally water repellent or hydrophobic, would cling to the tiny droplets of fat. Buoyed by these fatty rafts, the metal-rich concentrate would float to the surface as a frothy scum. The worthless rocky particles, which were easily wetted by water, would become heavy and sink straight to the bottom. A worker could then simply skim off the precious, metal-laden froth from the top, collecting a concentrate that was vastly richer than the original ore. This primitive flotation process dramatically increased the efficiency of every smelt that followed. Instead of wasting immense heat and charcoal on melting mostly rock, the furnace could be fed a pre-enriched material, yielding more metal from the same amount of labor and fuel. This was not a random discovery. It was an applied understanding of surface chemistry, a way of reading the hidden personalities of different minerals. The choice of fat was likely not accidental either. Different animal fats or pine resins would have created froths of varying stability, a nuance that could mean the difference between a good yield and a poor one. This clever use of a common biological agent hints at a vast, lost encyclopedia of practical knowledge. It forces us to ask what other secrets of separation, what other partnerships between the organic and the metallic were once commonplace in the workshops of the ancient world. The same animal fat that helped separate ore also points to another profound truth in ancient industry. Nothing was wasted, not even the skeleton. The 14th forgotten method reveals how burned and powdered bone became a cornerstone of ancient metallurgy. Bone ash, a substance we might associate more with fertilizer than with foundries, was in fact a secret weapon for working with the most demanding metals. Its primary ingredient, calcium phosphate, gave it two remarkable properties that metalworkers prized. First, it was incredibly refractory, meaning it could resist mind-boggling temperatures without melting or deforming. Artisans would line their small, portable clay crucibles with a thick layer of this fine white powder. When they placed a charge of gold or silver inside and thrust it into the heart of a furnace, the bone ash lining acted as a protective shell, preventing the molten precious metal from reacting with the clay crucible itself and becoming contaminated. This alone would have been valuable, but the second use of bone ash was even more ingenious. It was the essential component in a process called cupellation, the ultimate method for purifying silver. Silver ore is rarely found pure. It is almost always locked in a chemical embrace with lead. To free it, the metalworker would melt the lead-silver alloy in a special, shallow dish called a cupel, which was made almost entirely of compressed bone ash. As a powerful blast of air played over the surface of the molten metal, the lead would rapidly oxidize, forming a liquid called litharge or lead oxide. Here is where the magic of the bone ash came into play. The cupel was not an inert container, it was an active participant. Its porous, sponge-like structure greedily absorbed the molten litharge as it formed, wicking it away from the molten metal pool. The worker would watch as the lead seemingly vanished, soaked up by the bone ash dish, leaving behind a bright, shining button of nearly pure silver. This was high-stakes chemistry in action. The entire process hinged on the specific quality of the bone ash. Not just any bone would do. The selection of animal types, the age of the bone, and the exact temperature and duration of its burning and grinding were all part of a hidden recipe. A cupel made from poorly prepared ash could crack under the thermal stress, spilling the valuable metal, or it might not absorb the litharge efficiently, leaving impurities in the final silver. This use of a biological material to achieve a precise chemical separation is a stunning example of ancient innovation. It bridges the gap between the pastoral world of animals and the fiery heart of industry in a way that feels both primitive and incredibly advanced. The success of an entire silver mine could depend on a steady supply of properly prepared cattle bones. This reliance on such a specific, organic component makes you wonder how many other vital, everyday substances from the ancient workshop have simply faded from memory, leaving no trace in the archaeological record except for the pure metal they helped to create. That dark, silent sentinel in Delhi has defied time itself. The Iron Pillar of Delhi stands over 23 feet tall, a single, massive piece of wrought iron forged in the 4th century, and it has not rusted. Not in 1600 years of monsoons, of scorching heat, of modern pollution. This is not a matter of luck, it is a monument to a forgotten industrial art. Modern analysis reveals the pillar's secret lies in its unique chemical fingerprint. It contains a high amount of phosphorus and very little sulfur or manganese. This specific recipe was not an accident. It was the direct result of the ore the ancient Indian metalworkers used and the way they smelted it in their traditional furnaces. The high phosphorus content is the key. During the forging process, as the massive iron bloom was repeatedly heated and hammered, the phosphorus, along with iron particles, reacted with oxygen from the air. This created an astonishingly thin, invisible, and incredibly adherent barrier known as a passive protective film. Think of it as a glass-like skin, only a few hundred atoms thick, that bonded permanently to the iron's surface. This film is self-healing. If it gets scratched, the local chemistry allows it to reform, protecting the metal beneath indefinitely. But the composition was only half the miracle. The other half was the sheer physical feat of forging such a colossal object. Creating a uniform, protective layer required a perfectly homogeneous piece of iron. Any pockets of impurity, any uneven slag inclusions, would have created a weak point where corrosion could begin. The blacksmiths had to work this multi-ton pillar within a very narrow temperature range, hammering it with a rhythmic precision that distributed the slag evenly and welded the iron fibers into a seamless, unified whole. The protective film was not a paint or a coating added later. It was a property engineered directly into the metal's very being during its violent birth at the forge. This means the artisans who made it did not just create an object, they engineered a material with a specific, long-term function in mind. They built for eternity. The pillar stands as a stark challenge to our assumptions, forcing us to reconsider what ancient industry was truly capable of achieving on a monumental scale. That lustrous white gleam on a Chinese ceremonial vessel was a deliberate and startling choice. While the ancient world largely lived in a landscape of warm golds and coppery reds, some artisans in the Warring States period pursued a cooler, more silvery aesthetic. They achieved this by creating a unique type of bronze alloyed with nickel. This was not a common practice, it was a specialized endeavor for objects of high status and artistic ambition. The very presence of nickel in these artifacts presents a compelling puzzle. Where did it come from? One possibility is that metalworkers discovered and began exploiting rare ores that naturally contained a mixture of copper and nickel, a mineral known today as nickeliferous copper. Alternatively, they may have mastered the incredibly difficult task of deliberately adding pure nickel to molten bronze. This would have been a formidable challenge, as nickel has a very high melting point, requiring even more intense furnace temperatures and careful control to incorporate it evenly. Whichever path they took, the result was a material that broke the visual mold. This white bronze would have shone with a distinctive, almost otherworldly light, setting these objects apart in a society where visual symbolism was deeply intertwined with power and ritual. It represents a branch of metallurgy driven not by strength or sharpness, but by pure aesthetics, a desire to innovate for the sake of beauty and prestige. This pursuit of color and visual impact through metal itself was a sophisticated art, one that would find its ultimate expression not in an alloy, but in a breathtaking surface treatment that made ordinary metal look like solid gold. That pursuit of a gleaming white surface finds a strange echo in the quest for a perfect reflection. Long before the silvered glass mirror became commonplace, the most accurate images of the human face were seen in discs of a special, unforgiving alloy known as speculum metal. This was not a simple bronze. It was a brittle, temperamental material composed of roughly 2 parts copper to 1 part tin, a formulation that pushed the limits of what ancient metalworkers could reliably cast and finish. The high tin content gave the alloy its brilliant, silvery white reflectivity, but it also made it notoriously difficult to work with. Casting a flat, uniform disc was the first monumental challenge. If the molten metal cooled too quickly, internal stresses would cause the disc to crack as it solidified, sometimes splitting with an audible ping. If it cooled too slowly, the different metals within the alloy could begin to separate, creating a mottled, uneven surface that would never take a perfect polish. Roman artisans and later craftsmen in China developed sophisticated techniques to manage this. They might use massive, preheated stone molds to ensure a slow, uniform cooling rate, or they would bury the freshly cast disc in warm ashes for days, allowing it to anneal and release its internal tensions gradually. Once a sound casting was achieved, the true artistry began, the grinding and polishing. This was a painstaking process that could take weeks. The rough disc was ground against progressively finer abrasive stones, often using sand or powdered emery. The final polish was achieved with felt wheels and increasingly fine powders, perhaps even rouge. The goal was a surface so flat and so flawlessly smooth that it became a perfect reflector. The secrets were not just in the grinding, but in the precise composition of the alloy itself. The difference between a good mirror and a great one could hinge on a fraction of a percent more or less tin, or the presence of trace elements like arsenic or phosphorus that subtly altered the metal's crystalline structure and its ability to take a polish. This knowledge was the lifeblood of a few specialized workshops. With the decline and eventual fall of the Roman Empire, the intricate understanding of how to tame this brittle bronze faded away. The production of large, high-quality speculum mirrors largely ceased for centuries, a quiet casualty of a collapsing industrial infrastructure. The loss of this method represents more than just a forgotten recipe. It was a severing of the link between metallurgy and optical science, a partnership that would not be fully restored until the great telescope makers of the Renaissance struggled to rediscover the very same secrets. This drive to see more clearly, to capture light itself, was matched by an equally powerful urge to record information for the ages, leading to another metal-based innovation that would shape the course of history. That same drive for opulence that gilded statues also found expression in the cold strength of a warrior's blade. While some methods sought to change the very soul of the metal, others adorned its skin with breathtaking intricacy. This 18th forgotten method, the art of Damascening, transformed functional weapons into priceless works of art. It was the process of inlaying precious metals like shimmering gold or brilliant silver into a much harder base of iron or steel. The technique was a masterclass in precision and patience. An artisan would begin by engraving a delicate pattern onto the surface of a finished sword hilt or a ceremonial dagger. But this was not simple scratching. Using fine, razor-sharp chisels, the craftsman would undercut the grooves. This meant angling the cut so that the opening was narrower than the base, creating a dovetail channel hidden beneath the surface. This was the first secret, the creation of a mechanical lock. Into these prepared grooves, the artisan would lay a soft, fine wire of pure gold or silver. Then, with a light, perfectly calibrated hammer, they would tap the precious wire, forcing it to flow and spread under the impact, cold welding it into the undercut cavity. The skill was in the hammer's touch, too gentle a blow, and the inlay would not fully seat itself into the hidden lock, risking it falling out over time. Too forceful a strike, and the soft precious metal would deform, blurring the intricate design, or the hammer could slip and mar the perfectly polished steel background. This was not a process that allowed for mistakes. It required a steady hand, a breath held, and an intimate, almost instinctual knowledge of how two different metals would behave under pressure. The gold had to be soft enough to flow, the steel hard enough to grip it without cracking. The result was a stunning, permanent contrast, a gleaming, intricate tapestry of light against a dark, formidable ground. This was more than mere decoration on a weapon. On the hilt of a king's sword, such inlay was a statement of immense wealth and power. On a warrior's personal dagger, it could be a talisman, a prayer for protection etched not just on the surface, but locked physically into the very tool of survival. This decorative artistry stands in stark contrast to the purely functional methods of joining metals for strength, revealing that the ancient industrial world understood that the human spirit required beauty as much as it required utility. But such delicate artistry was only possible because of a far more brutal and fundamental process that produced the steel canvas itself. That delicate inlay of gold on a steel blade was only possible because the steel itself was first made whole. The 19th forgotten method, forge welding, was the fundamental art of making two pieces of metal become one. A skill that built everything from plows to anchors without a single spark from an electric welder. The process seemed deceptively simple. A blacksmith would take two pieces of iron, heat them in the heart of a charcoal fire until they reached a very specific, brilliant yellow-white heat, just shy of melting. Then, with a swift, decisive motion, he would bring them together on the anvil and fuse them with a rapid series of hammer blows, but the simplicity was an illusion. The true secret was hidden in the chemistry of the fire itself. A properly managed charcoal forge produces an abundance of carbon monoxide. This gas creates what is known as a reducing atmosphere, a chemical environment that actively strips oxygen away from the metal surface. This was the critical, invisible step. It prevented the formation of oxide scale, that dark, flaky crust that would otherwise act like a layer of sandpaper between the two pieces, ensuring they would never truly bond. In that perfect, fleeting moment at the welding heat, the surfaces of the iron were chemically clean and almost plastic. The hammer blows did not just press them together, they forced their crystalline structures to interlock and merge at a microscopic level, creating a single, unified grain. The smith's entire art rested on his ability to judge that exact moment. He watched for the specific color of the heat, a dazzling, almost uncomfortable yellow-white. A lower, red heat was useless for welding. The metal would not fuse. A moment too long in the fire, and the metal would begin to burn, becoming brittle and grainy, ruined for good. Once the pieces were at the perfect heat, he had only seconds to act. Every moment the glowing metal spent in the air, it was cooling and its surface was beginning to oxidize. The hammer strikes had to be precise, confident, and rapid, sealing the bond before the magic window closed. This was a high-stakes performance of heat, timing and force, repeated countless times to build up large objects like the iron staves for a great wooden ship or the heavy rings for a chain. The strength of an empire's navy, the reliability of a farmer's tool, all hinged on the blacksmith's intimate, unspoken dialogue with the fire. This mastery of joining metal was one of the most widespread industrial arts, yet its principles were so deeply tactile they defied easy written description. Its success, however, depended entirely on a steady supply of the one ingredient that made such intense heat possible, a resource whose management would become its own forgotten science. The rhythmic hammer blows that joined metals were only the beginning. To create the thin, uniform sheets needed for a soldier's breastplate or a temple's sacred vessel, a different kind of artistry took over. The creation of sheet metal by hand was a symphony of controlled violence and thermal intuition. It began with a thick cake of metal, heated until it glowed a dull red. The smith's first hammer strikes would spread the metal from the center outwards, but this was not random pounding. Each blow had to land with precise overlap, moving in a careful spiral pattern to stretch the material evenly in all directions. The true secret, the knowledge that separated a master from a novice, was not in the hammering itself, but in the pauses. As the metal was worked, its crystalline structure would become locked and stressed, a condition we call work hardening. If the smith continued too long, the once malleable sheet would become stiff and brittle, developing fatal cracks along its edges. To prevent this, the metal had to be repeatedly returned to the forge and heated to a specific, critical temperature in a process called annealing. This gentle reheating relieved the internal stresses, softening the metal and allowing the crystals to reform, effectively resetting the material so the hammering could continue. The master sheet metal worker knew the exact moment to stop and anneal, a feel developed over years of listening to the ring of the hammer and watching the way the metal flexed. For copper, it might be after 30 blows; for a softer gold, perhaps 50. The annealing temperature itself was another guarded variable, judged by the color of the glow in the dim workshop. This cycle of heat and hammer, repeated dozens of times for a single sheet, transformed a lump of metal into a flawless, thin canvas. The skill was so specialized that entire guilds were dedicated to this one trade, their techniques passed from father to son. The disappearance of this manual art represents more than just technological progress. It is the loss of a deeply tactile conversation between human and material, a rhythm of fire and force that built the skin of the ancient world. That profound black-purple luster was not painted on, but grown from within the metal itself. In Japan, master artisans developed an alloy known as Shakudo, a material that held a stunning secret in its very composition. Primarily copper, it was alloyed with a small but crucial amount of gold, typically between 1 and 5%. In its raw, freshly cast state, Shakudo was unremarkable, a simple, dull bronze color that gave no hint of the splendor to come. The transformation was everything. Artisans would subject the finished object to a specialized chemical patination process, immersing it in a secret solution known as rokusho. This solution, a complex brew often containing copper acetates and other salts, did not simply coat the metal. It triggered a controlled corrosion reaction that selectively darkened the copper at the surface. The tiny, dispersed particles of gold, however, resisted this darkening. The result was not a flat color, but an incredible, velvety black-purple hue with a deep, almost translucent glow, as if light was emanating from the very depths of the metal. This was not a matter of chance. The exact ratio of gold to copper was critical. Too little gold, and the surface would turn a dull, flat black. Too much gold, and the coveted dark purple hue would never develop, leaving the metal with a brassy appearance. The recipe for the Rokusho solution was even more closely guarded, a hereditary secret of specific metalworking guilds passed from father to son. The temperature of the solution, the duration of immersion, and even the method of polishing the object beforehand were all part of a precise, ritualized practice. This represents one of the highest forms of the metalworker's art, a deliberate move beyond the inherent color of the base metals to engineer an entirely new aesthetic through sophisticated chemical manipulation. The creation of Shakudo was an alchemy of color, proving that ancient industry was as much about profound beauty as it was about brute strength. This deep mastery over a metal surface invites a startling question. What other colors, now lost to time, could they conjure from simple copper and fire? The legend of Corinthian bronze begins not in a workshop, but in the ashes of a conquered city. Ancient historians like Pliny the Elder recounted a tale of spectacular destruction, claiming that when the Roman army sacked Corinth, the intense fires melted together the city's vast treasures of gold, silver, and copper, forming a new, singular metal in the smoldering ruins. Whether this dramatic origin is fact or fable, the story itself ignited the imaginations of metalworkers for centuries. The allure was not just the metal's supposed beauty, a shimmering blend of warm gold, cool silver, and coppery red, but the very idea of a perfect, natural alloy born from chaos. This myth drove artisans to attempt the impossible, to recreate this legendary material through deliberate skill. The challenge was immense. Simply melting the three metals together would typically result in a mottled, uneven material, not the harmonious, prized blend the stories described. Modern theories suggest the secret may have been a multi-stage process. One possibility is that they mastered a precise sequence of alloying, melting and remelting the metals in a specific order and under controlled conditions to achieve a uniform mixture. An even more intriguing theory points to a chemical finishing technique known as depletion gilding. In this process, the finished alloy object would be treated with a corrosive agent, perhaps a salt or acidic solution, that selectively dissolved the copper from the very surface layer. This would leave behind a much richer, more lustrous skin of gold and silver, creating the appearance of a solid, precious metal blend while using a far smaller amount of the expensive materials. The true recipe, however, the exact proportions and the specific steps for its creation and finishing vanished completely. It became a ghost of a metal, known only from descriptions in texts. The enduring quest to replicate Corinthian bronze tells us something profound about ancient industry. It was not solely concerned with practical strength or volume. There was a powerful aspirational drive, a desire to transcend the known limits of materials, to create objects of such sublime beauty that they passed into legend. This pursuit of the perfect metal, even one that may have been more myth than reality, pushed the boundaries of what was possible, proving that the fires of ancient forges were stoked by ambition as much as by charcoal. The same deep knowledge that guided a blacksmith's hammer also guided a prospector's footsteps through untamed wilderness. Ancient metal seekers possessed a hidden map, written not on parchment, but in the very flora of the landscape. They understood that certain plants thrived in soils saturated with specific metals, acting as living signposts to the treasures hidden below. A particular violet might signal a rich lead deposit, while a type of mint could indicate the presence of copper. This was the 23rd forgotten method, the use of plants in metallurgy and assaying, a seamless fusion of botany and chemistry that powered ancient industry. This knowledge transformed the hunt for ore from a game of random chance into a targeted science, saving countless hours of fruitless digging. But plants played an even more active role back at the furnace. The ashes of certain trees and ferns, burned in careful quantities, produced a substance we know as potash, a powerful flux. When this potash was mixed with the crushed ore in the smelting crucible, it performed a kind of chemical magic. It dramatically lowered the melting point of the rocky material, allowing the metal to separate out and flow together at a lower, more manageable temperature. More importantly, it reacted with the unwanted rocky impurities, the silica, to form a fluid slag that could be easily drained away from the pure, heavy metal. This was not a random act of throwing leaves on a fire. It was a calculated application of organic chemistry. The choice of plant mattered immensely, as different species yielded ashes with varying potash concentrations. This integration of the living world with the fiery forge represents a holistic form of early materials science, one that saw the environment not as a separate entity, but as a partner and a toolkit. Every step of the process, from finding the ore to purifying it, was supported by a profound, empirical understanding of nature's interconnected systems. This forgotten partnership raises a haunting question. As we rely on synthetic industrial chemicals today, how many other sustainable, nature-based solutions have we inadvertently left behind in the sands of time? A polished bronze mirror from the Han Dynasty holds a secret that defies simple sight. It appears entirely ordinary, a simple disc of metal with a decorative pattern cast on its back and a highly reflective face. Yet when a beam of sunlight strikes its surface and reflects onto a wall, something impossible happens. The light does not cast a simple circle. It projects a ghostly image, revealing the very pattern that is hidden from view on the reverse. These are the legendary magic mirrors, and their secret is one of the most subtle ever achieved in metal. The trick was not in any hidden compartment, but engineered directly into the mirror's soul through a process of differential casting. The bronze was not cast to a uniform thickness. The area corresponding to the hidden pattern on the back was made ever so slightly thicker during the initial pouring. After casting, the real artistry began. The reflective face was meticulously scraped and polished, but this was not a uniform process either. The artisan would remove more metal from the thinner sections and less from the thicker, pattern-aligned areas. This created a surface that looked perfectly smooth and flat to the eye and touch, but was actually a landscape of microscopic, invisible hills and valleys. The final, crucial step was the application of mercury-based amalgams to create a highly reflective surface. As this surface cooled and set, it locked in immense internal stresses. When strong light, particularly the concentrated heat of the sun, hit the mirror, these stressed areas expanded at slightly different rates. The invisible topography of the surface warped just enough, bending the light to project the concealed design onto a wall like a phantom. The exact sequence of casting, scraping, and stress relieving was a secret so delicate it vanished for over 1,000 years. Modern scientists using advanced scanning technology can now see the thickness variations, but replicating the artisan's exact process, the feel for the scrape and the intuition for the stress remains elusive. This was not merely a clever trick. It was a profound fusion of metaphysics, art, and precision engineering, a deliberate creation of mystery through a perfect understanding of material behavior. That final projection from a Han Dynasty mirror reveals a universal truth that ancient artisans across the world understood the hidden language of metals. Far across the ocean, in the pre-Columbian civilizations of Central and South America, metalworkers developed a brilliant and entirely independent solution to the age-old problem of prestige versus cost. Their masterpiece was an alloy called Tumbaga, a material that was as clever in its economics as it was in its chemistry. At its heart, Tumbaga was a blend of copper and gold, but it was the treatment after forging that unlocked its true magic. An object would be shaped, perhaps into an elaborate ceremonial mask or a ritual vessel, appearing with the dull, reddish hue of its copper-rich composition. Then came the transformative secret, a process known as depletion gilding. Artisans would apply acidic juices from local plants, a natural corrosive that they had identified through generations of experimentation. This acidic bath would not affect the gold, but it would selectively dissolve the copper from the very surface of the object. Over hours or even days, the copper was slowly eaten away, leaving behind a thin, spongy layer of pure 24-karat gold. This surface was not yet magnificent, it was dull and fragile. The final, crucial step was burnishing. Using a smooth, hard stone, the artisan would polish this porous gold skin with immense pressure and skill. This action compressed the delicate gold matrix, cold welding the microscopic pores shut and creating a solid, continuous, and brilliantly reflective surface of pure gold. To any observer, the object was indistinguishable from one made of solid gold, yet it had used only a fraction of the precious metal, was significantly harder and more durable, and was far lighter to wear. This was not a deceptive trick, it was a stroke of pure economic and chemical genius. The development of Tumbaga and its sophisticated finishing technique stands as a powerful testament to a global phenomenon. In isolation from the technological flows of Europe and Asia, these American civilizations arrived at their own profound metallurgical truths, proving that the drive to master fire and metal was a fundamental chapter in the human story everywhere it was written. Each of these 25 methods represents a chain of knowledge, a fragile link between generations that could be broken by a single event. The disappearance of these sophisticated arts was rarely a single catastrophe, but a slow fading, a death by 1,000 cuts. The most dramatic cause was the collapse of empires. When Rome or the Indus Valley civilizations fractured, the intricate networks they supported shattered with them. The royal workshops that demanded and funded masterpieces closed. The protected trade routes that supplied rare ores were severed. The specialized guilds of metalworkers who held their secrets close were scattered to the winds, their members forced to turn to farming or soldiering just to survive. In this new world, there was no patron to commission a Wootz steel sword or a Mercury gilded statue, and no apprentice to spend 10 years learning the precise color of tempering heat. The economic ecosystem that nurtured this high art simply vanished. But even in times of peace and prosperity, the very nature of this knowledge made it vulnerable. These were not formulas written in textbooks. They were embodied skills, a feel for the fire held in the hands and eyes of the master. The subtle rhythm of the bellows, the exact moment to quench a blade, the secret recipe for a clay mold mix. These were trade secrets guarded with a ferocity we reserve for state secrets today. This knowledge was transmitted through oral tradition and direct apprenticeship, a slow, personal passing of the torch. If a master died unexpectedly, or if an apprentice left the craft, that specific nuance, that irreplaceable trick, could be lost forever. It was a system built on trust and continuity, and it was heartbreakingly fragile. Then came the great disruptor, the Industrial Revolution. This was not a slow fading, but a purposeful abandonment. Why would a factory owner invest in the week-long, artisanal process of creating Wootz steel when the new Bessemer converter could produce tons of uniform steel in minutes? Why would a craftsman painstakingly inlay gold by hand when a machine could stamp out a cheap imitation for a mass market? The new economics of scale made these ancient methods financially obsolete almost overnight. The goal shifted from creating the finest object possible to producing the most objects as cheaply as possible. The old ways, for all their brilliance, could not compete. This combination of political collapse, deliberate secrecy, and industrial revolution created a perfect storm of forgetting. It forces us to see history not as a steady march of progress, but as a landscape littered with lost peaks of achievement, reminding us that our own technological civilization rests on a foundation that is, in many ways, just as fragile. Our journey ends not with an answer, but with a profound realization. These 25 forgotten methods paint a portrait of the ancient world not as a primitive prelude, but as a vibrant landscape of sophisticated industry. Every quenched blade, every gleaming gold inlay, and every rust-defying pillar was the product of centuries, a legacy of painstaking observation and refined skill passed from one generation to the next. This was not accidental discovery, it was a deliberate, cumulative science of fire and earth. These arts constructed the very skeleton of empires, furnished their temples with beauty, and armed their soldiers with strength. Their disappearance stands as a quiet testament to the delicate thread on which all human progress hangs, vulnerable to the collapse of economies, the scattering of masters, and the relentless tide of new industrial paradigms. Yet, in our modern laboratories and workshops, as we use particle accelerators to analyze the iron pillar of Delhi or struggle to replicate the watery patterns of true Damascus steel, we are doing more than just solving historical puzzles. We are reclaiming a lost conversation with our own past. This is not mere archaeology, it is a source of profound inspiration. The ancient artisans' deep, sustainable understanding of local materials, their clever use of organic chemistry, and their holistic view of the entire production chain from plant to polished metal offer powerful alternatives to our own resource-intensive processes. The fires in those ancient forges have long since turned to ash, but the wisdom they forged continues to glow, waiting for us to recognize its light. The echoes of those ancient forges still have so much to tell us. If this glimpse into the lost world of ancient industry captivated your imagination, your own curiosity is the next vital step. Which of these forgotten methods resonated most deeply with you? Was it the sheer ingenuity of the Haya furnace, the lethal beauty of Mercury gilding, or the eternal defiance of the Delhi pillar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I am genuinely eager to hear which technique you find the most revolutionary. For more deep dives into the secrets of our past and the mysteries hidden in plain sight, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell. Our next exploration into history's greatest enigmas is already on the horizon. The past is filled with countless stories just waiting to be uncovered, and your curiosity is the master key that can unlock them.